There were 3 expectant fathers waiting for news from the delivery room. A nurse came in and announced to the first man that his wife had just given birth to twins. "That's quite a coincidence," he said. "I play for the Minnesota Twins." A few minutes later, another nurse came in and announced to the second man that he was the father of triplets. "That's amazing," he said. "I work for the GM company." At that point, the third man slipped off the chair in a dead faint. When he came to, they asked him what happened. He said, "I happen to work for 7-Up." Do you remember the movie 3 Men and a Baby? That was a neat one. It's a wonderful story about 3 talented, powerful men who had things under control in their life. And then their world was transformed when they were in the presence of a baby. Our story revolves around 5 women and a baby. Well, actually 4 women and a girl, but she was just as important. The 5 women are Shiphrah, Puah, Jochebed, Miriam, and Pharaoh's daughter. Things have changed a lot since Joseph was a leader in Egypt. It's now 400 years later, and a new king is in control who wasn't familiar with the Hebrews history book. All he knew were that the Hebrews were outpopulating the Egyptians, and that scared him. Pharaoh tried to wear them down with work. Not only did he force the Hebrews to work at back-breaking jobs and long hours, the more they accomplished, the more work he gave them. And still, the Hebrew population grew. He decided all baby boys had to go. And so we get to Shiphrah and Puah. Pharaoh went straight to the midwives. He instructed them, when you deliver a baby in the Hebrew camp, if it's a baby boy, kill him. And when the Hebrew population still kept growing, he went back to the midwives. What's with all the baby boys in the Hebrew camp? Why aren't you following my orders? Showing their sense of humor, Shiphrah and Puah said, the Hebrew women are so strong, they have their babies before we get there. We don't know if the midwives were Egyptian or Hebrew, but they believed in Yahweh, and they chose to obey Yahweh instead of Pharaoh. When the midwives didn't work out, Pharaoh sent his own men house to house, snatching baby boys and throwing them in the Nile. From what I've read, the Nile was Crocodile Alley. Women who went to the river's edge to wash clothes had to be very careful. And it's not a pleasant thought that the Nile was used as a disposal area for those baby boys. Then we get to Jochebed. Amram and Jochebed were Levite couple in the Hebrew camp. And in light of Pharaoh's decree, the couple were kind of scared when Jochebed got pregnant. According to an old Midrash story, Amram had a dream that this baby would save the Hebrew people. Jochebed birthed a baby boy and named him Moses, keeping him hidden as long as she could. But finally his crying and his chortling jeopardized their safety. Something had to be done. Using what was at hand, Jochebed fashioned a basket out of the reeds from the river, waterproofed it, and set the baby with baby Moses in it into the bulrushes of the Nile. I guess the crocodiles didn't frequent the bulrushes. And then we get to Miriam and Pharaoh's daughter. Miriam was protective of that baby. She went to the water's edge to watch what would happen. Moses started crying, and there were some Egyptian women who were bathing, and then she noticed that the Pharaoh's daughter was there too. Uh-oh, what's going to happen? But the Pharaoh's daughter heart melted when she held the baby, the crying baby. She knew it was Hebrew. Was she aware of Pharaoh's command to kill all the Jewish baby boys? Did she ignore her father's command? Did she even know her father? It doesn't matter. She loved this little one. So Miriam came out of hiding and offered to get a wet nurse for Moses. And Pharaoh's daughter agreed, but instructed her to bring back the baby when it was older. Miriam returned the baby to Moses' mother. An anonymous author said, now here's the irony. Pharaoh's target was male children. He evidently assumed that females were no threat. He completely fails to see that 2 midwives have defied him and saved many children. He doesn't realize that it will be a Hebrew woman, the mother of Moses, who will foil his plans with a simple woven basket. He doesn't know that it will be a Hebrew girl, Moses' sister, who will have the savvy to propose that Moses' actual mother be the wet nurse, and she even got paid for it. Pharaoh apparently doesn't realize that his own daughter saved a Hebrew baby, and that this is the baby who will grow up and undo Pharaoh's designs on the Hebrews. What a twisted plot. When we think about the trouble in Nigeria or Iraq or Israel in the West Bank or Ferguson, these problems feel hopeless. Where is God in this violence and oppression? Where was God when the Hebrews were mistreated, overworked, beaten, and killed? Did they feel forgotten by God? The psalmists often lash out at God for abandoning them in their troubles. Yet the laments ended by remembering God's compassion and ultimate salvation. Pharaoh's daughter saved Moses, and Moses grew up to be the savior of his people and a special companion to God. 2 Psalms, chapters 90 and 91, have been ascribed to Moses. Psalm 90 begins, Lord, you have been our dwelling place in all generations. And then it continues, turn, O Lord, how long? Have compassion on your servants. Carrie and I attended a funeral of a dear friend this week. Kathy died of a brain tumor within a week of her diagnosis, leaving her family and friends and work community reeling with disbelief. She was a caretaker for her husband, who as a result of a swimming accident in his teens is quadriplegic. Their adopted daughter couldn't comprehend what was happening so suddenly. Where is God in this sad and complicated loss? Belden Lane recalls, I remember playing hide and seek together with my children for hours, but I worried about my son. For years, I couldn't get him to understand that he shouldn't yell ready when he found a good place to hide. He was missing the whole point of the game. One wants to hide well. Only later did I realize from his perspective I had missed the whole point of the game. The most fun comes in being found. Meister Eckhart exclaimed this mystery well. God is like a person who clears his throat while he's hiding, and so to give himself away. Perhaps God, even especially God, discovers the highest joy in hiding only so as to be found. You could say God works behind the scenes. The term suggests that something is secretly going on behind the scenes. That means something else is happening publicly. In the theater world, the people behind the scenes ensure the performers get what they need, when they need it, in the manner they need it. They change sets, they remove and add props, they turn the lights up and down. And the worst thing that can happen in a public performance is when a stagehand should attract attention to himself. In Moses' story and in our story, God is active in the background so the performance of the 5 women might be possible. God is working so we have everything we need to pull off our performance, even when we are called to live with incredible suffering. Our 5 women listened with ears of faith to know what they were called to do. God was working behind the scenes to protect and offer help to the right people at the right time, even though the Hebrews may have felt that the situation was hopeless. Scott Hosey, director for the Center of Excellence in Preaching, suggests a different way to characterize God's activity in troubled times. Hosey says, Pharaoh creates terror while God seems to provide no comfort to help his people in the midst of this mini Holocaust. And yet, God is there after all. He is in quiet mode, content to work behind the scenes through ordinary means of reproduction and birth. God works through people whom we don't expect to be part of the solution. Hosey continues, later on in Moses' story, we see God in active mode, speaking through a burning bush, inflicting plagues on the Egyptians, leading Israel with pillars of cloud and fire, and even parting the Red Sea. But in our experience, God's quiet activity in Exodus 1 and 2 is more typical of the God we know than the spectacular displays that come later in the story. No doubt the Israelites would have liked the spectacular stuff sooner, before things got so bad. It takes practice and some imagination to see the activity of God in troubled times. In closing, here's a story to ponder. An aging Hindu master grew tired of his apprentice complaining. He sent the apprentice for some salt. When the apprentice returned, the master told him to put a handful of salt in a glass of water and drink it. How does it taste? The master asked. Bitter, said the apprentice. The master chuckled. Now take the same amount of salt and throw it in the lake. The two walked in silence to a nearby lake, and the apprentice swirled his handful of salt into the water. And the old man said, now take a drink. As the water dripped down the young man's chin, the master asked, how does that taste? Fresh, said the apprentice. Do you taste the salt? No, said the young man. And at this, the master sat down beside the serious young man, offering his hands. The pain of life is pure salt, no more, no less. The amount of pain in life remains the same, but the amount of bitterness we taste depends on the container we put the pain in. So when you are in pain, the only thing you can do is enlarge your sense of things. Stop being a glass, become a lake. The Hebrew story is full of God's help and intervention. In their lives and in ours, God works both behind the scene and on the stage, in quiet mode and active mode. We can look at the pain in the context of our whole life, not just the difficult moment. Even the laments in the Psalms end up by saying, but then I remembered.